What's up YouTube? This is Zerco, and today, in Redstone Explained, we're going to be going over something that's going to help both the novice and the experienced redstoner alike. So I was designing this iron farm the other day for a future video, and I realized that the timing circuit that I made is in need of some explanation. So in this particular design, what I have here to make this zombie get to each one of our pods every 35 seconds is a fader pulse extender using comparators running into a falling edge monostable circuit. Now, that might seem like a bunch of gibberish, but that's what today's video is about. So we have a couple of different circuits here, and we're going to be going over how to manipulate pulse timings, circuit timings, and just generally how to time your different contraptions. So let's get right into it. Okay, so let's start off with explaining how exactly pulse is timed, how timing is measured. So a really good way to show this is with repeaters. Repeaters are a vanilla Minecraft redstone component, and they're actually pretty useful in terms of showing an actual representation of how long the redstone timing goes. So the timing is measured in what's called ticks. Now, a repeater can be set to 1 tick in this position, 2 ticks in this one, 3 ticks in this one, and 4 ticks at its greatest position. So 1 tick is going to be 1/10 of a second. So a repeater set on its max setting can delay a circuit by 0.4 seconds. So as you can see, that would be pretty useful if you only need a short delay. However, when you need something like 4, 5, 6 seconds, it's going to be a lot of repeaters. So it's not going to be super useful to just have a giant chain of repeaters like this. So that's why we have several other timing circuits that can help us with that. So the other downfall of repeaters, in addition to just being pretty short, is that they don't change the pulse length whatsoever. So as you see, when we hit this button, it's not going to actually change the pulse length. The pulse length is going to be the exact same as the input. So in our case, a stone button. So that's the whole pulse length that we're going to get. Now, there are ways that we can manipulate that, and we will get right into that with these next circuits. So a common circuit that you'll see, and one that I used in our iron farm example, is called a fader pulse extender. Now, a fader pulse extender is using comparators. Now, comparators are a really cool redstone component because what they do is they take the input at the back, and that can come from another redstone component or things like a chest or hopper, and it will give an output based on the strength or representative strength of the signal that it is reading. So if you chain comparators together like this, what you're doing is you're actually feeding the output of one comparator into the input of another. So it will be one less signal strength than the output will be one less signal strength than whatever the input is. So this creates a delay because the input comes in and then it'll give one less around, and it will then slowly drop by one signal strength each tick per comparator in the circuit. So as you can see, we got 6 comparators here, and if we press this button, we're going to get a massive extension to our pulse. Now, this is tileable, so you can extend this as much or as little as you want. You can have one that's just 2 comparators here, and it will be a short extension. Or you can have one with 12 comparators on each side, and it'll be a hugely long extension. So the way to actually calculate this is it's going to be whatever the input for your forward-facing comparator is, that strength minus 1 in ticks per comparator. So that sounds a little confusing, but If we have a button right here, meaning this is going to be our input into our forward-facing comparator, when this button goes off, it's going to give a 15 signal strength to this. So that means each one of these comparators is going to give 14 ticks of extension to the circuit. Now, that can be incredibly useful, and this is actually the most common way of doing a pulse extension, at least in my experience. So we've seen short delays with the repeaters, we've seen medium delays with the fader extenders. Now what if you need a really long delay, something like 10, 20, 30 seconds even, or even all the way up to 256 seconds, which is the maximum pulse extension for this circuit right here. Now this is a Hopper clock pulse extender, and it functions the same way that a regular Hopper clock does, with one little difference. So a regular Hopper clock will just alternate this block of redstone back and forth based on where the items are between these two hoppers. Now, when all the items get over to this one in a Hopper clock, this redstone would go over here, it would lock this hopper, unlock this hopper, and the items would transfer back over. And it would continue that on a clock. Now, with a Hopper clock pulse extender, the difference is we only have one sticky piston here. So this piston is sticky and this piston is regular. So the difference is when you get one full cycle of the clock, this piston will not retract this block back. Now, that makes it directional in terms of output. So we can use that to make a pulse extension. And if we look here, we can actually get a fairly long pulse extension. And this is only actually using 16 items. So you can see this is definitely, for the space used, already going to be much more reasonable than even using comparators if you wanted to get just this short, well, comparatively short extension. Now, obviously you can extend that as much as you want. Now, this is going to be an extremely long pulse, and this is only a quarter of the maximum potential of this pulse extender. So, as you can see, this is going to be used for things that you're only going to be setting off every once in a while, whether that be turning them off or turning them on. Now, when it comes out, you're always going to have an on power when the extender is active. But there are some ways that we can manipulate the circuit that we'll be getting into later. But this one, I will do a quick build through with you because some people can get a little confused. So you're going to have two hoppers facing into each other, the block of redstone on top of whichever one you want your input to come into. Now, on this side, we're going to have a sticky piston, and on this side, we're going to have a regular piston. Now, we put a building block here and a building block there, and some redstone dust on top of either building block behind the pistons, and comparators coming out from each of the hoppers. Now, we put some items in the forward-facing hopper. When you first construct it, it will automatically go through one cycle. And that's it. So now, this is going to be our input. So whenever we give a pulse here, it will start the extension, and it will come out of here. And this is going to be our output. Now, a fairly similar circuit is what's called the dropper latch pulse extender. Now, the way that this works is you have two droppers here, and the forward-facing one is going to have one item in it. Now, when you give an input, the forward-facing dropper will eject its item into the rear-facing dropper, giving a comparator output to the sticky piston. Now, this is working on the exact same principle that the hopper clock was, where it has two hoppers facing into each other. One of them is going to be locked, the other is going to be unlocked, and they're going to transfer items back and forth. Now, when the hoppers go through one cycle, it will send a pulse back through, to the rear-facing dropper, putting the item back in the forward-facing dropper. So let's see it. And you can get similar length pulse extensions to the hopper clock. It's just the difference of initial pulse timings. So with the hopper clock pulse extender, the initial timing with one item is going to be 4 ticks, and then every item additionally is going to be 8 ticks. However, with the dropper latch, the initial is going to be 8 ticks, and then every additional is going to also be 8 ticks. So it just depends on the exact number of ticks that you would like your pulse to be. I've used both before in different situations, and both are equally good in terms of usefulness. So it's really just whichever one you prefer and whichever timing works best for your situation. Okay, so we've talked about extension. Now let's talk a little bit about manipulation. So as you can see, if we just give a regular input to, for example, a sticky piston, it'll extend and then it will retract at the end of the signal. However, sometimes that's not exactly what you want. Say you wanted to do something like a flip-flop circuit where you had a block of redstone, and when it was in this position, it engaged the circuit. When it's in this position, the circuit's off. So a really easy way to create a flip-flop is by using what's called a rising edge monostable circuit. Now, that's a really fancy name for something that's not actually that difficult to understand. So a monostable circuit is just going to be a circuit that takes a pulse and converts it to 1 tick. And a rising edge monostable circuit is going to do that at the beginning of the pulse, and then a falling edge monostable circuit is going to do that at the end of a pulse. So as we can see here, this will convert our pulse to 1 tick, and we can prove that by the sticky piston. When it receives a 1 tick pulse, it will not do a full retraction or a full extension and retraction. It will only do one or the other. So if we hit this, we see that the block came back. If we hit it again, the block gets spit out. Now, I am not a big fan of how people use the term 1 tick pulse to explain that, because what it really is it's more like a half of a tick pulse. Because if you give just a regular 1 tick pulse, which I can show you on the falling edge monostable circuit, because that gives a actual full 1 tick pulse, if you set it up that way, it will go through the full extension and retraction. So basically what a 1 tick pulse is when people are talking about it like that is it's more so of a half a tick, because like what's happening with this is we have a sticky piston under here, and what's going on is the signal is getting sent through this block, which is in turn powering the piston, right? But as soon as the piston extends, it loses its power. So then it immediately retracts. So this all happens in the same tick. So it's not actually taking a full tick to happen. It's all happening in the same tick. So it's more so a half tick pulse. It's easier to understand that way. And it gets less confusing when you are working with actual one tick pulses that are a full tick and you don't see that same behavior that we're seeing here. So just something to remember. But this is the most common way of having a rising edge monostable circuit. It's super simple. All you have is an input into a block, and underneath that block, you're going to have a sticky piston with a block on top of it and a repeater coming out of the block to grab the signal. And then there is your output. So that is going to be your typical rising edge monostable circuit. Okay, so we talked about rising edge monostable circuits, but what about falling edge? What if we want something to give a pulse at the end of an input? Because rising edge is great and all, but if you want something to happen not exactly at the very start of a pulse, then it's not so great. So what we have here is called a falling edge monostable circuit. Now I can show you with this, and as you can see, at the end of the input, it gives a pulse. Now this is what I was talking about with a true one tick pulse, and you can see that because the way that this works is you have a torch here that is powering this block and inverting this torch. Now it's also powering this repeater, which is powering this block and inverting this torch. Now when you give input and you power this block, it flips the whole thing. Okay, and then there is a delay in the circuit between the inversion and returning to normal. So a redstone torch inverting takes 2 ticks. Now what we have here is a repeater set on 3 ticks. So at the end, if you're quick enough, you can catch it. At the end, what's happening is it takes 2 ticks for the redstone torch to invert, but then it takes an additional tick after that for the repeater to fully power and send this inversion back to normal. So what we get is 1 tick between this one going off and this one lighting up this block. We have 1 tick where this torch is still lit and it's going to be lit, and we're going to get a output from that. Now, when I was talking about my problem with people calling it a one tick pulse, is if you have, so what we just did mathematically is proven that this is a true one tick pulse. However, if we take a look here, it's not having that same piston behavior that we saw with the other one tick pulse. Now, this is an actual one tick pulse, whereas like I was saying with this one, this is more of a half a tick, and that's where you get that piston behavior. So that is my reasoning for that. But this is the other component that I used in the timing circuit for the iron farm. Because what I wanted was I used a fader extender, if you remember back there, but it gave an output that was on, and I only wanted the output to be on at the very end of the extension. I was using the extension as a form of timing. So I just ran the output into a falling edge monostable circuit. So at the end of the extension, it would give a pulse. And if we go up here, we can actually see that in action. So we'll wait for him to come over here. You can see I have the fader extender that is powering up the circuit. Now, it's going to wait until this fader extender goes off and then send a pulse, sending the zombie on his way. So, as you can see, they're two relatively simple concepts, and if you take them one at a time like this, and you say, oh, okay, well, it's just a comparator fader extender that runs into a falling edge monostable circuit, it doesn't seem so bad. But when you look at it like this, it can seem a little intimidating. Now, there's one last thing to talk about, and that is, okay, so we saw the problem with the 1 tick pulse and how this is a full tick. Now, what if we wanted it to give that half-tick pulse that gives you that traditional, quote, 1 tick pulse behavior? And we can totally do that by just taking the two monostable circuits and chaining them into each other. So what we have here is the exact same thing we have here. It's a falling edge monostable circuit, but the output for this is running into a rising edge monostable circuit. And the rising edge monostable circuit will give the 1 tick pulse behavior. So we can see that it waits till the end of the pulse, and then this is actually kind of cool because this gives no delay because it all happens in the same tick. So it waits till the last tick of the pulse and then sends a signal that takes on that 1 tick pulse behavior going into our flip-flop here. So as you can see, between the iron farm example with the extender and the monostable circuit, and here with the double monostable creating a flip-flop, there are many ways that you can chain these things together and create super useful circuits. Now, this video has been all about circuit timing and circuit pulse manipulation. So obviously there is still a lot of other components that you need to know when building a redstone contraption. However, these tend to be the most common circuits that people should be using that they can't figure out how to solve the problem for. So I think that just knowing these circuits here, and with these two, you can learn one or the other. It doesn't really matter. But just knowing these simple circuits here will improve your redstone capabilities by a lot. All right, well, that has been pulse manipulation and circuit timing on today's episode of Redstone Explained. I am your host, Zerco, and I had so much fun explaining this to you guys. Now, stay tuned and watch out for this iron farm tutorial video that I will be posting within the next couple of days, and practice these circuits, and I wish you all the best at your redstoning endeavors. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment down below, and watch out for more Redstone Explained. Bye-bye.